The Great Hall of the Galactic Concord was built to make visitors feel small. Its ceiling stretched so high that clouds sometimes formed near the top. The walls were made of living crystal that changed color with the mood of whoever controlled the room. Today, the crystals glowed a satisfied orange. Ambassador Kethrix stood at the center of the hall, his insect-like body covered in ceremonial robes. His species, the Volcari, had ruled this part of the galaxy for 10,000 years. They had seen countless younger species rise and fall. They had watched empires crumble and new ones take their place. But they had never seen anything quite like humans. 300 years ago, humanity had stumbled into the galaxy like a child wandering into a room full of adults. They were small. They were weak. They lived barely a century before dying of old age. Their bodies broke easily, and they needed constant food and water and sleep. And yet, somehow, they refused to die. Kethrix clicked his mandibles as he watched the human delegation enter the hall. There were 5 of them, dressed in simple dark uniforms. At their head walked Admiral Chun, a woman whose hair had turned gray, but whose eyes remained sharp as broken glass. Behind the humans came the Thrum delegation. These were massive creatures, standing 7 feet tall with 4 muscular arms and skin covered in thick scales. The Thrum were warriors. They had been bred for combat over 50,000 years, their bodies designed to kill. Their leader, a scarred veteran named Vorum, took his place at the opposite end of the hall. Kethrix allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. Everything was going according to plan. The Amber Worlds were the prize everyone wanted. 7 planets rich in rare minerals, sitting at the edge of council space. Both humans and Thrum had claimed them. Both species had sent colonists. And both were ready to go to war. A war between humans and Thrum would solve many problems for the Volcari. The humans were becoming too successful, too influential. They adapted too quickly, learned too fast. Other species were starting to respect them, even admire them. This was dangerous. The Thrum, meanwhile, were simply annoying. Their war clans raided too often and disrupted trade. They needed to be kept busy with something other than attacking Volcari merchant ships. A war between the 2 species would weaken both. The Volcari could then step in as peacekeepers and claim the Amber Worlds for themselves. But Kethrix had devised something even better than war. He had devised a massacre. "We are gathered here to sign the final agreement," Kethrix announced, his voice echoing through the great hall. "This treaty will bring peace to the Amber Worlds and prevent unnecessary bloodshed." Admiral Chun stepped forward. Her face showed nothing, but Kethrix had learned to read human body language over the years. She was suspicious. Good. Suspicion would not save her people. "The terms of the agreement are simple," Kethrix continued. "Both humans and Thrum will be granted settlement rights to the Amber Worlds. However, to prevent conflict, certain rules must be followed." He activated a holographic display that filled the center of the hall. Words appeared in dozens of languages, spelling out the terms of the treaty. First, a transition zone will be established around all 7 planets. Within the zone, no advanced weapons may be used by human forces. Chun's eyes narrowed. Define advanced weapons. Kethrix had prepared for this question. Energy weapons of any kind. Projectile accelerators. Guided missiles. Chemical propellants. Electromagnetic systems. Nuclear devices. Anything developed after your species' pre-industrial era. A murmur went through the human delegation. One of the younger officers leaned close to Chun and whispered something urgent. She silenced him with a look. "And the Thrum?" Chun asked. "Are they bound by the same restrictions?" Kethrix spread his arms in a gesture of false regret. "The Thrum have made no such agreements. Their religious laws forbid them from surrendering their weapons. Surely you understand." The message was clear. Humans would be disarmed. Thrun would not. Any conflict between them would be a slaughter. Elder Vorum let out a rumbling laugh from his side of the hall. His warriors joined in, the sound filling the chamber like thunder. They already saw the humans as prey. Soft creatures with fragile bodies, soon to be stripped of the technology that made them dangerous. Chun remained silent for a long moment. The crystals on the walls flickered between colors, unable to read her emotions. "If we refuse to sign?" she asked finally. "Then the Concord will recognize the Thrun claim to the Amber Worlds," Kethrix replied. "Your colonists will be given 30 days to evacuate. Any who remain will be considered trespassers." It was an impossible choice, and Kethrix knew it. The humans had invested too much in those colonies to abandon them. They had sent thousands of people, built cities, started families. They would not leave. But staying meant fighting the Thrun with nothing but their bare hands. Chun turned to consult with her delegation. The whispered conversation was intense, with several officers shaking their heads. But Chun seemed calm. Too calm, perhaps. When she turned back to face the hall, her expression had not changed. But there was something in her eyes that Kethrix could not identify. It looked almost like anticipation. "We accept the terms," Chun said. "Humanity will sign the final agreement." Kethrix felt a surge of triumph. He had expected more resistance, more negotiation. The humans were famous for finding loopholes in treaties, for turning disadvantages into advantages. But this time, there was no escape. The treaty was perfect. The signing ceremony took less than an hour. Chun pressed her hand to the document, leaving a genetic signature that bound all of humanity to its terms. Vorum did the same for the Thrun, though his signature was merely a formality. His people were not restricted by the agreement. As the delegations prepared to leave, Kethrix approached Admiral Chun. He wanted to see defeat in her eyes, wanted to taste her despair. "A wise decision, Admiral," he said. "The Concord values peace above all else." Chun looked at him with those sharp gray eyes. "Yes," she said. "I am sure you do." She turned and walked away, her officers falling into step behind her. Just before she reached the door, she paused and looked back. "Ambassador," she called. "May I ask you something?" Kethrix inclined his head. "Of course. In your studies of human history, did you ever learn about a battle called Thermopylae?" Kethrix searched his memory. Human history was long and bloody, filled with countless wars. He could not recall this particular reference. "I do not believe so," he admitted. Chun smiled. It was not a pleasant expression. "You should look it up," she said. "I think you would find it educational." Then she was gone, and Kethrix was left standing alone in the great hall, wondering why victory tasted so strange on his tongue. The colony ship Persistence was the largest vessel humanity had ever built. It carried 50,000 people across the stars, along with everything they needed to build a new life on distant worlds. It had hospitals and schools and parks with real trees. It had factories that could manufacture almost anything. And deep in its belly, hidden behind thick metal doors, it had something else entirely. Master Sergeant Elena Vasquez walked through the converted cargo bay, inspecting her soldiers as they trained. The bay had been transformed over the past 6 months. What was once a storage area for farming equipment now looked like something from ancient Earth history. Racks of weapons lined the walls. But these were not the plasma rifles and railguns that human soldiers normally carried. These were older, much older. Crossbows, longbows, swords, and spears. Shields made of layered metal. Armor that covered soldiers from head to toe. At first glance, they looked like museum pieces. But anyone who looked closer would see the difference. The crossbows were built from materials that did not exist in medieval times. Their limbs were made of carbon fiber, strong and flexible. Their strings were synthetic polymers that would never rot or break. The mechanisms that drew them back were engineered with perfect precision, each piece fitting together like a puzzle. The swords were folded steel, their edges sharpened to a width of only a few molecules. They could cut through almost anything. The armor was made of ceramic and titanium alloys, shaped by hand in forges that used no computers. Each plate was fitted to its wearer perfectly, allowing full movement while protecting vital areas. Elena stopped beside a young soldier who was practicing with a crossbow. He drew back the string, aimed at a target 50 meters away, and fired. The bolt struck dead center. "Good shot, Private Torres," Elena said. Torres lowered his weapon and turned to face her. He was barely 20 years old, recruited straight from the Mars colonies. Like all the soldiers in Elena's company, he had been chosen for his physical strength and mental discipline. "Thank you, Sergeant," he said. "But I still do not understand why we are using these weapons. We have rifles that can hit targets from kilometers away." Elena had heard this question many times over the past months. She gave the same answer she always did. "The treaty says we cannot use advanced weapons in the transition zone. Energy weapons, projectile accelerators, guided missiles, chemical propellants. All banned. But these are just crossbows," Torres said. "How are they not banned?" Elena smiled. "Because the Valkyrie who wrote the treaty do not understand what a crossbow is. Their species never developed projectile weapons. They went straight from primitive tools to energy manipulation. To them, anything that does not use power cells or magnetic fields is primitive." She picked up one of the crossbow bolts from a nearby rack. Its tip was made of tungsten carbide, hard enough to punch through armor plating. Its shaft was perfectly balanced, designed by engineers who had spent months testing different configurations. "This bolt was designed using computers," Elena said. "It was tested in wind tunnels and laboratories. Every aspect of its flight path was calculated and optimized. But it was manufactured by hand in a forge with no electronic components. Technically, by the treaty's definition, it is a primitive weapon." Torres looked at the bolt with new respect. "So we are following the rules." "We are following the exact letter of the rules," Elena confirmed. "The Valkyrie wanted to disarm us. They wanted us helpless against the Thrum. But they made a mistake. They assumed the primitive meant weak." She gestured around the training bay. Everywhere, soldiers were practicing with their new weapons. Some worked with swords, learning techniques that had been forgotten for centuries before being revived by military historians. Others practiced with spears, forming tight formations where each soldier protected the one beside him. "Humans spent 10,000 years killing each other with weapons like these," Elena said. "We perfected the art of warfare long before we discovered electricity or gunpowder. The Valkyrie think they have sent us back to the Stone Age. They have actually sent us back to the Age of Empires." A bell rang through the bay, signaling the end of the training session. Soldiers began putting away their equipment, moving with the careful efficiency of people who took pride in their work. Elena walked to the front of the bay, where a large screen displayed a map of the Amber Worlds. 7 planets, each marked with locations where human colonies had been established. And surrounding those colonies, red zones indicated areas where Thrum war clans had been spotted. Colonel Marcus Webb stood before the screen, studying the tactical situation. He was Elena's commanding officer, a veteran of 3 colonial wars who had volunteered for this mission despite being old enough to retire. "The Thrum are gathering," Webb said without turning around. "Our scouts report at least 5 war clans within striking distance of Colony 7. That is roughly 1,500 warriors." Elena stood beside him. "When do we expect them to attack?" "Within the month. They are waiting for all their clans to arrive." The Thrum believe in overwhelming force. They want to crush us in a single battle, make an example that will frighten the other colonies into surrendering. What are our numbers? 400 soldiers in the 4th Irregulars. Another 200 militia from the colonists. We are outnumbered more than 2 to 1. Elena studied the map. The terrain around Colony 7 was hilly, covered in forests of amber-colored trees that gave the planets their name. Good ground for defense if used correctly. We will need to choose our battleground carefully, she said. Force them to come to us on ground we control. Webb nodded. I have already identified several positions. Amber Ridge is the most promising. High ground with clear sightlines for our crossbows. Narrow approaches that will limit how many Thrum can attack at once. He turned to face her. Sergeant, I want you to lead the shield wall. You have been training these soldiers for 6 months. They know you and trust you. When the Thrum charge, it will be your job to hold the line. Elena felt the weight of that responsibility settle onto her shoulders. She had trained for this her entire career. But training was not the same as battle. Theory was not the same as watching friends die beside you. I will hold, sir, she said. Webb put a hand on her shoulder. I know you will. The whole galaxy thinks we are helpless without our technology. They think we are soft, weak, dependent on machines. It is time to remind them what humans are really made of. He looked back at the map, at the red zones that represented enemies waiting to kill them all. Our ancestors conquered worlds with bronze swords and wooden shields, he said. They built empires that lasted centuries, using nothing but muscle and iron and the will to survive. The technology changed, but humans never did. We are still the same stubborn, vicious, endlessly adaptable creatures that crawled out of the caves and decided to rule the earth. Elena thought of her soldiers, practicing in the bay behind her. Young men and women from a dozen different planets, learning to fight with weapons their great-grandparents would have recognized. The Thrum have never faced a shield wall, she said. Webb smiled grimly. No, they have not. Chieftain Grakmal led his warriors through the amber forest as the sun began to rise. The trees around them glowed with golden light, their strange leaves catching the morning rays and scattering them like jewels. It was beautiful land. Soon it would belong to the Thrum. 300 warriors followed behind Grakmal, moving through the forest with the silence of born predators. Each stood over 7 feet tall, their bodies covered in scales that could stop a knife blade. Each had 4 arms, 2 for fighting and 2 for grappling. Their eyes could see in darkness, and their ears could hear a heartbeat from across a room. They carried plasma blades at their sides, ceremonial weapons passed down through generations. The edges hummed with contained energy, hot enough to cut through metal. The Valkyrie Treaty had banned humans from using such weapons. It had said nothing about the Thrum. Grakmal smiled, showing rows of sharp teeth. This would not be a battle. It would be a harvest. The human colony lay just beyond the ridge ahead. His scouts had reported that the soft creatures were preparing some kind of defense, but what could they possibly do? Without their guns and ships and machines, humans were nothing. Prey animals pretending to be predators. He raised one hand, signaling his warriors to slow. They emerged from the tree line and looked up at Amber Ridge. The smile faded from Grakmal's face. The humans were waiting for them, not hiding in their shelters, not fleeing for their ships. They stood at the top of the ridge in formation, hundreds of them arranged in tight rows. Morning sunlight gleamed off their armor, off the shields they held before them, off the long spears that bristled from their ranks like the quills of some massive beast. For a moment, Grakmal simply stared. He had fought humans before, in ship-to-ship battles where their missiles and railguns had proven deadly. But he had never seen anything like this. They looked like statues carved from metal. They did not move. They did not flinch. They simply stood and waited. One of his captains moved to his side. "Chieftain, what are they doing?" Greg Mole shook off his confusion. Whatever this display was, it changed nothing. The humans had no guns. His warriors had plasma blades and bodies bred for war. Numbers and biology were on his side. "They are trying to frighten us," he said. "It will not work. Signal the advance." War drums began to beat. The sound rolled across the valley, deep and steady, matching the rhythm of Thrum hearts. Warriors began to move forward, spreading out into a wide line as they approached the base of the ridge. Then the first volley hit. Greg Mole heard the sound a fraction of a second before the screams began. A whistling in the air, like wind through canyon walls. Then his warriors started falling. He looked up and saw dark shapes arcing through the sky, dropping toward his forces like rain. They struck with terrible force, punching through scales and flesh. Warriors who had survived plasma burns and blade wounds crumpled to the ground, iron bolts buried deep in their bodies. "Cover!" Greg Mole roared. "Find cover!" But there was no cover on the open slope. His warriors scrambled behind trees and rocks as a second volley fell. Then a third. The humans on the ridge had not moved. They stood in perfect stillness while death rained down from positions Greg Mole could not even see. He spotted one of the shooters at last. A human in mottled clothing that blended with the forest, lying in a shallow depression 50 meters away. The creature was operating some kind of device. A bow-shaped weapon that launched bolts with mechanical precision. Crossbows. The humans were using crossbows. Greg Mole felt rage building in his chest. This was an insult. This was an offense against everything the Thrum stood for. To be attacked with such primitive weapons, such simple tools, was a humiliation beyond bearing. "Charge!" he bellowed. "Kill them all." His warriors surged up the ridge. They were fast, covering ground with long strides that ate up the distance. The crossbow bolts continued to fall, but now the Thrum were moving too quickly to be easy targets. They would reach the human line in seconds. Greg Mole ran at the front of the charge, plasma blade ignited and humming in his primary hands. He could see the humans clearly now, could see their faces through the gaps in their helmets. They looked calm. Why did they look so calm? The Thrum hit the shield wall like a wave striking a cliff. And the wall held. Greg Mole slammed into a human shield with all his strength and momentum. The impact should have knocked the creature flying. Instead, the human slid back half a step, braced against the warriors on either side, and held position. Then the spears came. They thrust out from between the shields, jabbing at faces and throats and joints where armor did not cover. Greg Mole knocked one aside with his secondary arms, but another caught him in the shoulder. The pain was sharp and immediate. He swung his plasma blade in a burning arc. It should have cut through the human shield like paper. Instead, it skidded across the surface, leaving a glowing scar but failing to penetrate. The shield was made of something his blade could not easily cut. All around him, the battle devolved into chaos. Thrum warriors threw themselves at the human line again and again, and each time they were pushed back. The shields moved together like parts of a single machine. When one human fell, another stepped forward to fill the gap instantly. The spears never stopped stabbing. The spears never stopped stabbing. And still the crossbow bolts fell, picking off warriors who strayed too far from the fighting. Greg Mole lost track of time. He fought until his arms burned and his breath came in ragged gasps. He watched warriors he had known for decades die on human spears. He watched his proud war clan being slaughtered by creatures half their size. Finally, he heard a sound that broke through the roar of combat. A horn, blowing 3 long notes. The human signal for something. The shield wall began to move. Not back, not retreating, Forward, step by step, the humans advanced down the ridge. Their shields stayed locked. Their spears kept thrusting. And the Thrum, exhausted and bleeding, began to give ground. Gregmal felt something he had not experienced since he was a child, something he had thought his warrior training had burned out of him forever. Fear. Fall back. He roared. Fall back to the forest. His surviving warriors turned and ran. There was no order to the retreat, no discipline. They simply fled, scrambling down the slope while crossbow bolts chased them. Gregmal was the last to leave. He stood at the base of the ridge and looked up at the human line. They had stopped advancing. They stood in formation, silent and still, watching him go. One human stepped forward from the line. A woman with dark hair and eyes like chips of ice. She removed her helmet and held his gaze across the distance between them. She did not smile. She did not gloat. She simply looked at him with an expression he could not read. Then she turned and walked back to her soldiers, and Gregmal limped into the forest with the ruins of his war clan. He had brought 300 warriors to the ridge. Fewer than 200 followed him now. The humans had lost perhaps 20. As he fled through the amber trees, Gregmal thought about what he had witnessed. The shields that could not be broken. The spears that never stopped. The bolts that fell like deadly rain. He had underestimated them. They all had. And somehow, impossibly, the prey had become the predator. The crystals in the great hall of the Galactic Concord had turned a sickly gray color. They reflected the mood of the assembled ambassadors, none of whom could quite believe what they were hearing. Kethrix stood before a holographic display, watching battle reports scroll past in damning detail. 17 engagements between human and Thrum forces. 17 human victories. Casualty ratios that should have been impossible. "This is a mistake," he said for the 5th time. "The data must be corrupted." Elder Vorum of the Thrum rose from his seat. He was old for his species. His scales faded to a dull gray, but his voice still carried the authority of a lifetime spent commanding warriors. "There is no mistake, Ambassador. I have spoken with the survivors myself. The humans have found a way to fight us. An effective way. With pointed sticks?" Kethrix's mandibles clicked in disbelief. "With sharpened metal? Your warriors are bred for combat. They should tear humans apart with their bare hands." Vorum walked slowly to the center of the hall. He moved with the careful steps of someone who had learned patience through many hard lessons. "Tell me, Ambassador, what do you know of human history?" Kethrix waved a dismissive appendage. "I know they are a young species. Barely 3 centuries in space. Their homeworld was violent and primitive." "Violent," Vorum agreed. "Very violent. Do you know how they fought each other before they developed your beloved energy weapons?" The question seemed absurd. Kethrix had never considered it. Why? Would anyone study pre-technological warfare? Vorum activated a new display. Images appeared. Drawings and paintings from human history. Armies clashing in dusty fields, soldiers in metal armor. Siege engines throwing stones at city walls. Humans spent 10,000 years perfecting the art of killing each other, Vorum said. They did not have plasma blades or railguns. So they made do with what they had. Iron, steel, leather, and wood. The images shifted. Formations of soldiers moving in perfect unison. Shield walls advancing like slow-moving tides. Crossbow volleys darkening the sky. They developed tactics that allowed weak creatures to defeat strong ones. They learned to fight as single units, each soldier protecting the others. They created weapons that could kill from a distance, before the enemy could close to fighting range. Kethrix studied the images with growing unease. He saw soldiers dying by the thousands. He saw cities burning. He saw a species that had made war into a science long before they understood what science was. The Valkyrie never developed projectile weapons, Vorum continued. You went from primitive tools directly to energy manipulation. The same is true of most species in the Concord. We never needed to fight the way humans did, so we never learned their methods. But the Thrum, Kethrix protested. Your species was engineered for warfare. For a specific kind of warfare, Vorum corrected. Close combat, individual strength and speed. We overwhelm our enemies with physical superiority. We do not form shield walls. We do not fight as formations. We do not rain death from a distance while standing perfectly still. He turned to face Kethrix directly. You gave the humans a restriction that played to their oldest strengths. You took away their modern weapons and forced them to rely on their most ancient skills. Skills they had forgotten, but never truly lost. The doors of the great hall opened. Every ambassador turned to watch as Admiral Chun entered, her gray hair pulled back and her uniform crisp and clean. Behind her walked a Thrum warrior, limping slightly but holding his head high. Kethrix recognized him from the battle reports. Chieftain Grakmal, commander of the first war clan to face the humans at Amber Ridge. He had lost an arm in the fighting but refused to accept a prosthetic. Ambassador Kethrix, Chun said, thank you for arranging this meeting. Kethrix struggled to find words. Admiral Chun, I did not expect, that is to say. You did not expect me to be alive? Chun smiled slightly. I understand. You designed your treaty to ensure my people would be slaughtered. You assumed we would be helpless without our technology. She walked to the center of the hall and stood beside Vorum. Grakmal took a position behind her, a Thrum warrior apparently serving as bodyguard to a human commander. Let me tell you what you failed to understand, Chun said. Humans did not become dangerous because we invented guns and missiles and starships. We invented those things because we were already dangerous. The technology was just a tool. The willingness to use it, the creativity to adapt it, the stubbornness to keep fighting no matter the odds, that was always inside us. She gestured at Grakmal. The chieftain and I have had many conversations over the past weeks. At first, he wanted revenge. His warriors had died. His pride had been wounded. He came to the negotiating table ready to demand blood. Grakmal spoke, his deep voice filling the chamber. Instead, the Admiral offered me something unexpected. She offered respect. The Thrum are warriors, Chun said. They value strength and courage and skill in combat. When we defeated them, we earned the right to speak with them as equals. When we treated their wounded and returned their dead with honor, we earned something more. Kethrix felt the situation slipping away from him. This was not how it was supposed to go. The humans should have been begging for peace, offering concessions, surrendering their claims to the Amber Worlds. What are you saying? He demanded. I am saying that the Thrum have withdrawn their claim to the Amber Worlds, Chun replied. In exchange, humanity will provide them with something they want very much. And what is that? Grakmal bared his teeth in what Chun had taught him was called a smile. Training. The word fell into silence. Every ambassador in the hall stared at the unlikely pair standing before them. A human admiral and a Thrum chieftain, enemies who had become something else entirely. The Thrum are strong, Chun explained. They are fast and tough and brave. But they have always relied on individual combat skills. They have never learned to fight as formations, to coordinate their strengths, to use tactics developed over thousands of years of human warfare. She turned to look directly at Kethrix. We are going to teach them. Human instructors will train Thrum warriors in the methods that defeated them. Shield walls, coordinated volleys, defensive positions and strategic retreats and ambush tactics. Kethrix felt his thorax constricting. The implications were horrifying. Thrum warriors were already dangerous. Thrum warriors trained in human combat doctrine would be devastating. You cannot do this, he said. The treaty forbids. The treaty forbids advanced weapons in the transition zone, Chun interrupted. It says nothing about sharing knowledge. It says nothing about training exercises. It says nothing about building an alliance between two species that you tried to turn against each other. She stepped closer to him, and for the first time, Kethrix understood why humans had survived so long in such a hostile universe. It was not their ships or their weapons or their technology. It was their eyes, cold and calculating and utterly without mercy. You wrote your treaty to destroy us, Chun said softly. You forgot the first rule of warfare. Never give your enemy time to adapt. Never assume you know what they are capable of. And never, ever back them into a corner. She turned and walked toward the door. Grakmul followed, and Vorum joined them. At the threshold, Chun paused and looked back. The Amber Worlds belong to humanity now. The Thrum are our allies. And the next time you try to manipulate us, Ambassador, remember this day. Remember what happened when you took away our weapons and thought it would make us weak. She smiled, and it was the same smile she had shown him when signing the treaty. The smile of someone who had already won. It just reminded us how dangerous we were before we had weapons at all. 10 years had passed since the Battle of Amber Ridge. Governor Chun stood on the balcony of the administrative center that humans and Thrum had built together. Below her, the city of New Harmony spread out in all directions, a strange and beautiful mix of human and Thrum architecture. Tall spires designed for four-armed climbers rose beside squat buildings meant for smaller residents. Parks and training grounds filled the spaces between. She was no longer Admiral Chun. She had retired from military service 5 years ago, choosing instead to help build something new on the Amber Worlds. A civilization that combined the best of two species. The morning sun cast long shadows across the training field below. A mixed squad of soldiers drilled in formation, moving through exercises that had been developed specifically for their unique composition. Humans and Thrum fighting side by side, each covering the weaknesses of the other. Human soldiers held the center of the shield wall. They were smaller, but their formations were tight and disciplined. They moved as a single unit, shields locked and spears ready. Thrum warriors held the flanks. They were taller and stronger, able to strike over the heads of their human allies. Their forearms let them wield shields and weapons simultaneously, adding layers of defense and offense that pure human formations could not match. And behind them both, mixed teams of crossbow operators provided covering fire. Humans handled the precision aiming. Thrum handled the heavy siege crossbows that required 4 arms to operate effectively. It was something new, something that had never existed before in all the long history of the galaxy. A young Thrum approached the balcony. His name was Vekmul, nephew of Grakmul, and he served as Chun's aide and translator. He was barely mature by Thrum standards, but he had grown up in the years after the peace, learning to see humans as partners rather than prey. The latest survey results have arrived, Governor, he said. The mineral deposits on Amber 4 exceed initial estimates by 40%. Chun nodded. The Amber Worlds were proving even richer than anyone had expected. Enough resources to build a fleet, if they chose to do so. Enough wealth to make them a major power in the galactic economy. How are the Concord ambassadors responding? Vekmul made a rumbling sound that was the Thrum equivalent of a laugh. Ambassador Kethrix has filed another formal protest. He claims that joint human-Thrum military exercises violate the spirit of the final agreement. The spirit, but not the letter. Exactly. The treaty only restricts weapons in the transition zone. It says nothing about what we can do once the territory is settled. And it says nothing at all about training programs or defensive preparations. Chun smiled. The treaty that Kethrix had designed to destroy humanity had become their greatest protection. Its precise language, meant to strip humans of every advantage, had instead created legal loopholes wide enough to fly a colony ship through. She thought about the journey that had brought them here. The fear and uncertainty of those early days when everyone expected slaughter. The long months of preparation, forging weapons that technically complied with alien definitions of primitive. The battles where disciplined formations faced down enemies twice their size. And now this. A new civilization rising on 7 worlds, built by species who had been enemies and became something more. "Governor," Vagmol said, "my uncle wishes to speak with you. He says it is important." Chun turned from the balcony. Greg Maul waited in her office, his massive form bent over a tactical display. He had aged in the past decade. His scales were duller, and the arm he had lost at Amber Ridge had been replaced with a mechanical prosthetic that whirred softly when he moved. But his eyes were still sharp, still carrying the fire of a warrior who had learned new ways to fight. "Old friend," Chun said, "what brings you here today?" Greg Maul straightened. "News from the core worlds. The Valkyrie are building a new fleet. They claim it is for defense against pirates, but our sources say otherwise." Chum studied the display. Ships under construction at 6 Valkyrie shipyards. More ships than they had built in the previous century combined. "They are afraid of us. They should be." Greg Maul's voice carried grim satisfaction. "We have grown strong. Our population increases every year. Our warriors train constantly, and the minerals from these worlds will soon give us the ability to build ships of our own. Ships with weapons that do not violate any treaty. Ships crewed by humans and Thrum fighting together." Grekmol showed his teeth. The Valkyrie thought they were setting a trap. They thought they could control us by taking away our technology. Instead, they reminded us of what we truly are. Chum moved to stand beside him. She was old now, her hair completely white and her body beginning to slow with age. But her mind was as sharp as ever, still planning, still thinking moves ahead. "When I was young," she said, "I studied history. Not military tactics or political strategy, but the deep history of humanity. How we survived when we were weak. How we grew when everything seemed set against us." She touched the display, zooming out to show the whole sector. Human and Thrum colonies marked in blue. Valkyrie territory marked in orange. Other species scattered between. "Do you know what I learned? Humans are not special because we're strong or fast or clever. Many species are stronger, faster, cleverer. We are special because we refuse to give up. We adapt. We learn. We find ways to survive when survival seems impossible." She looked at Grekmol. "The Valkyrie wanted to bury us with that treaty. They wanted to throw us into a hole and let us die. Instead, we used their shovel to dig ourselves out." Grekmol placed one of his massive hands on her shoulder. It was a gesture of respect among the Thrum, offered only to those who had earned it through combat or wisdom. "My people tell stories of the Battle of Amber Ridge," he said. "They sing songs about the shield wall and the rain of bolts. Human children learn our hunting songs, and Thrum children learn your battle hymns. We have become something new together, something the galaxy has never seen before, something they will learn to respect. Or to fear." Chun nodded slowly. The future was uncertain. The Valkyrie would continue to scheme, and other species would try to use humans and Thrum against each other. There would be challenges ahead, conflicts that could not be solved with shield walls and crossbow bolts. But humanity had faced extinction before and survived. They had been stripped of their weapons and still found ways to fight. They had been thrown into a trap and turned it into an opportunity. The Galactic Concord had thought they understood humans. They had watched humanity for 3 centuries and believed they knew what the young species was capable of. They were wrong. Humans were not defined by their technology or their weapons or their starships. They were defined by something deeper. A stubbornness that refused to accept defeat. A creativity that found solutions where none seemed to exist. A willingness to fight always, no matter the odds. The Amber Worlds were just the beginning. Chun could see that now. What started as a desperate defense had become the foundation for something greater. A partnership that combined the physical power of the Thrum with the tactical genius of humanity. An alliance forged in battle and strengthened by mutual respect. She looked down at the training field, at the soldiers who represented the future of two species. The galaxy had wanted to keep them primitive. Instead, they had reminded the galaxy what primitive really meant. And they were just getting started.